the summary that I want to make. And measurement of natural capital or national wealth. Well, that's the up to now the first manufactured capital. That's the typical thing that the economists are doing. It's easy to measure, and it's a flow concept. Every year, GDP, global domestic product, means every year how much did you manufacture, and how can you convert that on into monetary value. And that's the typical economic indicator to measure the size of the economy. That's the capital accumulated from annual manufacturing, which is the flow value. And natural wealth, or natural capital, that's the stock values, not really annual values. So we calculate. And the second thing is the human and the social capital. It's very somewhat difficult to measure, but somehow we could measure it. The education of the people and entrepreneurship, innovations, and typical example of the innovations nowadays, the business from Google or Facebook, such kind of new business, which is not easy to measure, like what in the manufacturing area, but somehow including this human capital and the social dimension, social capital, somehow we could measure and we could add when we calculate the national wealth. But the difficult part, the last part, is the natural capital state. Water, forest, and other products from ecosystem. Well, the value of water, for example, is very difficult to measure. And it's very different from country by country, region by region. For example, I don't know how much is this bottled water here, but I know that at least the Evian is more expensive than the gasoline that we use for car. Because Evian is a much easier process to just to pumping out the water and then plug into the bottle. But to make the gasoline, it requires more complicated process. But the value, the price of the Evian is more expensive than the gasoline. The price of gasoline. That's what you put more values. You put more. You are willing to pay more to this water. That's something. In case of I think the drinking water case, I just give the one example. But as the same token, when you measure the value of forest in a country, obviously that's different from the other country. But the how to measure and the methodology itself is very difficult. So the topic that I'm talking today is really about this side, the natural capital, how to measure that. And in addition, well, this natural capital is very much invisible. Not like a mobile phone that we have. When you say fresh water or flood protections and so on, it's difficult to image, difficult to measure, and it's not visible. And very difficult to measure, as I emphasized many times, in converting that into monetary value. It's very difficult to measure and converting to the numbers and values that we could understand. That's the monetary value. Okay, what's the value of Hala Mountain here in terms of Korean currency? That is very difficult to measure. Therefore, the values and contribution of the natural capital to the national account, annual account like a GDP, somewhat in general, the tendency is either underestimate or forget it. We missed that part. So that underestimated and missing part is the core part when we talk about the natural capital. And this is one example. I took it from the recent report from the World Bank, who is doing this measuring the national wealth value system things and moving beyond the GDP. The first part is basically this one is an example from the Thailand. There's a mangrove trees, And if you keep using this mangrove and just calculate the value of mangrove only, then it's about $1,000 per hectares. And if you convert, you cut out all these mangrove trees and then make the fishery farming area, then you could calculate that's kind of opportunity cost from the economic side. Then it's about 10 times higher. It's $10,000 something. Oh, but there's something missing there is the last part thing. If you calculate the values of mangrove, it's not just the producing mangrove value itself, which can be easily converted into the market value, market values. Not only for that, one of the important role of mangrove trees is to protect the coastal areas from storms and so on, which is very difficult to measure. But if we add up something over there, that's based on one, I think, Dutch professor, then the values are much higher, 2 times higher than the value of fishery converting these mangrove trees. I think that's the idea how to measure this mangrove thing. And he said, I'm running out of time, so I hope that even if there is no hard copies, I'm sure that my presentations are available, right? Fine? It's available, right? So I think, let me just go to the ecosystem values, and I'm sure that you know better than me about this topic, so let me skip all this. And the one thing that I want to really highlight is integrating the ecosystem. Well, the ecosystem and natural system and human system, basically it's the interaction between these two systems. And environmental impact assessment is how to minimize the harmful environmental impact of either development or the human's interventions. And on the other hand, the ecosystem valuation is how to maximize the value of ecosystem itself. The concept and the definitions are a little bit different, but there are some rooms to integrate these two different systems. And well, this is a quick summary of two different concept: environmental impact assessment and ecosystem service. As I said, one is to minimize the negative impact. On the other hand, ecosystem valuation, and that means to maximize the benefit from this ecosystem. And method, again, I think one is to predict the negative impact, but the other one is how to quantify some difficult qualitative assessment that the methodology focus on, and the outcomes again to reduce some negative impact versus preparing the benefit maximizing measures from the environment. And again, this is a quick summary about what I've said. But let me give you one example. Okay, this is one specific examples done by this Korean Land and Housing Corporation when they developed the project site for the housing. This is the environmental impact assessment case. And as you see here, pre-development and post-development, you can see some specific indicator. For example, what about the plant biomass thing? What about the air pollution things and so on? Over there, it's very easy to quantify. And again, the assessment by the policymakers or developers, I think it's up to them. But my point is, okay, this is something done in the environmental impact side. And is there anything for calculating or considering the ecosystem service values by doing this project? So that's why from now on, I think when we do some project, when we design a project, not only doing this environmental impact assessment to minimize the negative impact, at the same time, we have to consider the positive side. By doing so, whether we could get more environmental, ecosystem services from this kind of new activity or interventions by human society. We have to consider that part. I think that's the challenge that I want to share with you. That's the challenges that how to define and measure the national wealth and develop common method for every country to follow. Because it's very difficult, as I said, the environmental conditions are not only country by country, even local village by village, they are different. So is there any common methodology we can provide? That's the first thing. And obviously there are some deviations and considering the unique features and character of each specific case. But the first thing is we have to think about to develop the common method for every country to follow. That's the big challenge. And the second thing is the GDP. Obviously, as I said from the beginning, GDP cannot capture the nature of this ecosystem service values. So we have to develop the new methodologies and the new way of thinking. Especially, I think environmental economists are struggling to develop this new methodology. And third thing is, even in the environmental impact side, I think we have to really develop more carefully and develop more sophisticated and quantifiable indicators, so that this environmental impact assessment translate into these quantified numbers can help for the policymakers or planner to consider this negative impact more precisely. And finally, the integration, that's my big challenge, and I want to really listen to or have some discussion with the other speakers and the discussant about this topic. I have no answer, but the integration of the valuation of ecosystem service, that one into the environmental impact assessment process, that's a really big challenge. And really something that we should think about from both academic and from this practical project development side. I think that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. The second presenter is Professor Akira Tanaka, and we have, after finishing the four presenters' presentation,
how about some quick ask and quick question, because the another topic is really very different case, so we easily cannot imagine. So a quick ask a quick question, 1 or 2 minutes.
Do you have any question for the presentation of the Dr. Jung Tae-yong?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The second presenter is Professor Akira Tanaka. His major specialty is habitat evaluation procedure. Okay, Professor Akira Tanaka. You have at least 10 minutes for presentation.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for your kind introduction. Hello, everybody. I am very honored to have this opportunity here today. I'd like to thank sincerely to the Korean Society for Environmental Impact Assessment, especially the current President Dr. John Juan, former President Kim Myung-jun. And when he's back, she helped me a lot. Gave me this great opportunity. This is Mount Fuji. I'm from Shizuoka, where Mount Fuji is located. This photo of my hometown shows importance of balancing the development and nature conservation. These are my topics today. The first topic is compensatory mitigation in environmental impact assessment, EIA. Before discussing this I'm sorry, I should. This figure shows the role of mitigation in EIA. If you consider an environmental impact problem in EIA, mitigation measures is a solution to the problem. It is important to clearly show the balance between the environmental impact and the mitigation to public. This diagram explains mitigation hierarchy. The mitigation hierarchy is a hierarchy of measures examined in EIA to mitigate the projected negative environmental impacts of development project. These measures are complete avoidance, temporal avoidance, spatial avoidance, minimization, and compensation in order of priority. In other words, you cannot propose compensatory mitigation without considering avoidance and minimization. This is mitigation hierarchy in EIS. However, as long as there is a project, compensatory mitigation is the only way to achieve no-net loss of biodiversity in the area. This figure shows the concept of compensatory mitigation. If a habitat loss cannot be avoided at the development site, compensatory mitigation is undertaken to minimize the habitat loss of the entire area by restoring or maintaining a similar habitat elsewhere in the area on the responsibility of the developer. This diagram shows a mechanism of mitigation banking. Unlike individual compensatory mitigation, a third party called mitigation banker secures a large piece of land and restores its nature first. The outcomes of the ecological restoration are then assessed quantitatively. The mitigation banker can sell the outcomes to developers. So mitigation banking is a market-oriented compensatory mitigation mechanisms. I believe you now understand compensatory mitigation and mitigation banking are effective mechanisms for integrating ecosystems conservation cost into project cost. For these mechanisms, you need to ecologically and quantitatively grasp the impacts of development and the effects of mitigation in EIA. Then I'd like to show you new Japanese efforts in connection with quantitative assessment. The first effort is an environmental impact assessment where I used full-scale HEP to assess a housing development project in Yokohama City. The habitat evaluation procedure, HEP, is a procedure to biologically and quantitatively assess development projects. On the basis of positive and negative impacts of the activities on the habitat of wildlife species and suitability of the habitats. I converted this procedure created in the United States to suit a mosaic pattern of land use in Japan. The final unit of HEP is a cumulative habitat unit expressed as a value obtained by multiplying three values of habitat quality, habitat space, and habitat time. This cumulative habitat value is calculated for each development proposal to compare the proposals from the viewpoint of habitat conservation. In this HEP, we prepared 4 proposals. Present indicates the original proposal. Plan A means a proposal of taking mitigation measures recommended by the experts from HEP team. Plan B means a proposal of taking ordinary mitigation measures and no action indicates proposal of giving up the development project. In this help, we aimed to conserve the typical Satoyama ecosystem, which consists of the valley and its surrounding hills. I selected 4 typical species living in valleys or hills that are vulnerable to man-made changes and of great public interest. The target species are 2 species of firefly and 2 species of frog. What is important in HEP is to carry out a series of analysis fairly to both the developer's side and the conservationist side. In this HEP, we set up 1 team, each for fireflies and frogs. The members of each team include 3 NGO representatives against the development project and frog or firefly experts to make the assessment framework as fair as possible.